Now, developing news out of Gaza as a humanitarian ceasefire has just been called. The ceasefire will only last a few hours. And for an in-depth look at the conflict, we turn to Phyllis Bennis, the director of the new Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you, Ms. Bennis, for joining us. We really appreciate it. So you heard our late-breaking news now that Israel is calling for a humanitarian ceasefire. Why now?
I think they're under enormous pressure because the humanitarian consequences of their airstrikes have been so devastating. We just saw in Ayman's report one hospital. This is not even a regular surgical hospital. This is a rehabilitation hospital. The patients there are largely paralyzed, unable to move. So the idea that they should be moved out when the Israelis say, we're going to bomb your area, you better move, this is causing humanitarian catastrophe.
Right, and move to where?
There's nowhere to move. Gaza is completely surrounded. One of the many violations of international law involved in this attack is that the Palestinians of Gaza are being denied the right to seek refuge. They're being denied the right to flee. They get messages from the Israelis, you should leave. Where can they go? It's the fourth most densely populated piece of land in the world. And there is nowhere to go out. The crossings into Gaza and into Israel are blocked, are closed. So there is no safety.
Right. Well, now, Hamas has essentially dug its heels in the ground and rejecting the deal put on the table by Egypt. But it is a humanitarian crisis. Israel has this new Iron Dome that's really helping them in this horrible war. Netanyahu is saying that Hamas is waging a double-edged type of war, saying that he's using the Palestinians as human shields.
This is just
Why is Hamas pushing back at this point?
Well, I think we have to first say that what Netanyahu is claiming about human shields is simply not true. The human shields we just saw, they are internationals who have gone to the hospitals hoping that their presence will raise the cost politically for Israel, and that might lead to the possibility of pulling back from attacking a hospital, for instance. Those are the human shields. The Palestinian civilians are not human shields. But why the Hamas leadership is taking this position, from what we can understand, the agreement was negotiated between Israel and Egypt. Hamas, no Palestinians were involved at all. And their demands, which are for a lifting of the siege, which has been in place now for 8 years. People in Gaza do not have the ability to go in and out. No food, medicine, et cetera, goes in and out, except for the minimal amount that Israel allows. So one demand is that at least one of the crossings be opened. The other, that the Palestinian prisoners who had been released during the prisoner exchange a few months ago have now been picked up in a huge sweep. Before this crisis, this part of the crisis in Gaza began, the Israelis spent the 2 weeks when they said they were looking for the teenagers who had been killed, despite the evidence that now is emerging that they actually knew they were dead from almost the moment they were first kidnapped, that they spent that time arresting over 500 Palestinians, many of whom were now being rearrested after having been released. So one of the other demands is for the release of those prisoners. None of them have been charged with anything.
Well, you've got John Kerry and Blair coming out in favor of Israel, obviously, and saying, Hamas, you need to listen up and come to the table with us. What do you do at this point? What does Hamas do at this point? Because it is a humanitarian crisis, and they're not getting what they want with the tactic that they're pursuing.
And what they want are humanitarian demands for opening up the strip, allowing people to breathe, allow people to export strawberries, to import some food, to get medical supplies in. 90% of the water in Gaza right now, and there's very little available, 90% of what is available, according to the United Nations, is not fit to drink because, among other things, the sewage treatment plants and the water treatment plants have been bombed in this recent raid. Several workers at the water treatment plant have been killed, bombed when they were trying to make repairs. So the humanitarian conditions are devastating, and that's what the Hamas demands speak to. The immediate part is a devastating problem. If they agree now and say, we will stop and hope that the Israelis stop, which has not been the practice in the past when there have been ceasefires. If you look, for example, at the years 2013 and the first half of 2014, which was the ceasefire that was first created in November of 2012, that ceasefire held on the Palestinian side. No Israelis were killed by Palestinian rocket fire, but a number of Palestinians were killed by Israeli rocket fire. So the history is not a good one.
The area is obviously just littered and really is in dire need of
it's in dire need of
infrastructure rehabilitation.
Absolutely, but there's also right now a real need for a ceasefire. But there needs to be a real ceasefire, which means that all sides that are that are causing the military strikes have to be involved in the discussions. You can't have Israel negotiating with Tony Blair and John Kerry and the Egyptians and then present that to Hamas and say, here it is, take it or leave it, and think you're going to get anything other than a response that says we're going to leave it.
Phyllis Bennis, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We really appreciate it.